The Galactic Union had tested countless civilizations, each one eager to prove its worth among the stars. The test was always the same, a simulated extinction-level event designed to push a species to its absolute limit. It was a test of survival, unity, and intelligence, but no species had ever passed. The mighty warriors of the Isekai had fallen to internal wars. The brilliant strategists of the Vexari had been too slow to adapt. The resourceful traders of the Zorath had hoarded supplies instead of sharing them, dooming their own kind. Every species had failed, proving themselves too weak, too divided, or too rigid to earn true membership in the Union. And now, it was humanity's turn. The humans had only recently stepped into the vast galactic stage, their homeworld still fresh with the scars of war and struggle. They were seen as primitive, reckless, and unpredictable. The Union did not expect them to succeed. They merely wanted to confirm what they already believed, that humanity, like every other species before them, would collapse when truly tested. The trial was simple. The humans would be placed in a simulated version of Earth, stripped of their technology, and forced to face a carefully designed catastrophe. The Union had chosen a scenario that had crushed the greatest of civilizations: a global blackout, a dust cloud that blocked the sun, and a total collapse of all resources. Food would become scarce, water undrinkable, and communication impossible. It was a slow, grinding apocalypse, designed not to destroy in an instant, but to break the spirit. The humans had no idea that this was a test. To them, it was real. As the simulation began, the Union observed. At first, the pattern seemed familiar: panic, fear, confusion. Cities descended into chaos as power grids failed and supplies ran dry. People rushed to stores, taking what little they could find, and governments scrambled to regain control. The Union watched closely, waiting for the inevitable breaking point. In every other species, this was the moment where things spiraled out of control, where riots turned into civil wars, where neighbors became enemies, where desperation drowned all reason. But then, something strange happened. The humans did not shatter. Instead of crumbling, they adapted. Within days, makeshift power sources were created, old machines were repaired, and survival zones were established. Communities formed, not to fight over resources, but to share them. While there were still those who sought to take advantage of the chaos, they were dealt with swiftly, not by oppressive leaders, but by the people themselves. There was no single hero, no lone savior. Instead, ordinary men and women took charge, guiding others, forming teams, and finding solutions. Where other species had hesitated, the humans acted. Where others had turned on each other, they reached out. They did not wait for salvation. They built it. The Union intensified the test. They introduced new disasters: plagues, extreme weather, and food shortages worse than any before. They watched, expecting humanity to finally collapse. But instead, the humans adapted once more. They found ways to grow food underground, they purified water using ancient methods, and they spread knowledge faster than the Union had ever seen. They used fire signals when communication networks failed, they built wind power generators from scraps, and they worked together despite their differences. The Union saw something they had never witnessed before: cooperation, not born from necessity, but from choice. Humanity did not survive because they were the strongest or the smartest. They survived because they refused to fall alone. As the months passed, the Union officials could no longer deny what was happening. The humans were not just enduring the test. They were mastering it. They had turned what was supposed to be their downfall into an opportunity to evolve. The Union had expected them to follow the same path as every other species to fight. But instead, they had created a new path entirely. The impossible challenge, the trial that had broken every civilization before them, was nothing more than another obstacle to overcome. The Union had watched species with greater intelligence fail. They had seen warriors with unmatched strength crumble. But humans? Humans were something different. They were not the most powerful, nor the most advanced, but they had one thing no other species had ever shown: the ability to endure, no matter the cost. For the first time in history, the Union was afraid. Not of humanity's strength, but of what they represented. They were a species that refused to be controlled, refused to surrender, refused to accept defeat. If they could pass the test so easily, what else were they capable of? What would happen when they truly reached the stars, not as a desperate species fighting for survival, but as a force ready to reshape the galaxy? The answer was clear. Humanity was not just another species struggling to find its place. They were something far greater. And for the first time, the Union realized that the test they had designed to judge others might no longer be the ultimate measure of worth. Because the humans had not only passed, they had changed the game entirely. The moment the simulation started, humanity was thrown into darkness. Every city, every street, every home lost power in an instant. The great networks that connected the world collapsed, and communication was reduced to nothing. Satellites, internet, electricity, everything was gone. The sky, once bright with the sun and stars, was now covered by an unnatural black cloud, a thick layer of dust that blocked all light. Crops began to wither without sunlight, water sources became undrinkable, and the world grew cold. The test had begun, and the Galactic Union watched in silence, expecting the same story they had seen countless times before: chaos, collapse, and failure. At first, their expectations seemed correct. The initial shock sent waves of panic through human society. People rushed to stores, grabbing whatever food and water they could find. Governments struggled to send out emergency messages, but without power, their words reached only a few. Airports shut down, factories stopped working, and even hospitals lost their ability to function properly. The world was on the edge of disaster, and the aliens observing the test prepared to document another failure. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of descending into madness, humanity adapted. Within hours, radio operators dusted off old equipment, using battery-powered transmitters to send messages across long distances. Amateur mechanics salvaged parts from broken machines to create small generators, providing just enough power to keep emergency shelters running. Where technology had failed, human ingenuity took over. In the streets, some desperate individuals tried to take advantage of the situation, looting stores and attacking the weak. But unlike other species that had collapsed under lawlessness, humanity had an answer. Ordinary people, those who had never been soldiers or warriors, stepped up. Neighbors protected each other, forming watch groups to keep the streets safe. Instead of letting violence spread, communities fought back, not with fear, but with unity. The Union officials watched in disbelief. Other species had let fear consume them, but humans had turned fear into determination. Days passed, and food supplies began to run low. The test was designed to starve them, to break their will, but once again, humanity refused to surrender. Farmers, hunters, and survivalists stepped forward, teaching others how to grow food in darkened conditions. Scientists trapped in failing laboratories found ways to purify water using primitive yet effective methods. Old knowledge, long thought obsolete, became humanity's greatest weapon. They did not rely on governments or leaders alone. Each person became responsible for their own survival, and in doing so, they ensured the survival of those around them. The aliens had seen countless civilizations face hunger, and they had always turned to the same pattern: hoarding, betrayal, and war. But humanity did something different. They shared. They rationed food carefully, giving enough to keep people alive while ensuring that no one starved completely. Even in the face of hunger, they held on to something no other species had shown: compassion. The Union grew desperate. This was not how the test was supposed to go. They had designed it to be impossible to pass, yet humanity was enduring. They needed to push harder. The next phase was activated. Unnatural storms formed across the world, bringing freezing temperatures and violent winds. Earthquakes struck key regions, destroying shelters and cutting off vital supply lines. Entire communities were left exposed to the elements, their homes reduced to rubble. The aliens were certain that this would be the breaking point. They had seen mighty civilizations crumble when nature turned against them. No species had ever been able to withstand both starvation and the wrath of the environment. But once again, humanity refused to fall. Instead of mourning their losses, they rebuilt. Men and women who had once lived ordinary lives now stood side by side, clearing debris, constructing shelters from broken materials, and tending to the wounded. Fire became their lifeline, providing warmth in the freezing cold. The young carried supplies for the old, and the strong protected the weak. The very thing that had destroyed other species, the relentless brutality of nature, became another challenge for humanity to overcome. The observers were stunned. Humans did not see disaster as the end. They saw it as something to fight against, something to endure. It was not hope that drove them forward, nor was it blind optimism. It was something far stronger, the refusal to accept defeat. Weeks turned into months, and the simulation continued. The test was no longer just a trial. It was a war between humanity and the very limits of survival. The Union had designed this scenario to crush the spirit, to expose the weakness of any species that faced it. But humanity had done more than endure. They had thrived. They had rediscovered skills that had been buried by technology. They had remembered how to survive, not as individuals, but as a species united by purpose. And most terrifying of all, they had done it faster than any species before them. The Union officials gathered in silence, watching the screens that displayed Earth's simulation. The test had not gone as planned. By now, humanity should have collapsed, its people reduced to warring tribes or starving refugees. But instead, they had done the impossible. They had proven that the very things that had destroyed other civilizations, fear, chaos, and scarcity, were merely obstacles to overcome. For the first time, the Union faced a question they had never needed to ask. What happens when a species does not fail? What happens when they succeed beyond all expectations? The ordeal was far from over, but one truth was clear. Humanity was not just surviving the test. They were rewriting its very purpose. The Galactic Union had watched with growing disbelief as humanity continued to defy the test. Months had passed since the ordeal began, and yet, against all logic, they still stood. The disasters that had wiped out countless civilizations had not broken them. They had lost power, lost sunlight, lost food and water, yet they endured. They had faced hunger, disease, and storms, but instead of collapsing, they adapted. They found solutions where others had only seen despair. They protected one another when they should have turned to violence. The Union had never encountered a species like this before. It was not strength, intelligence, or even luck that kept them alive. It was something deeper, something that no simulation could account for. But the Union was not ready to accept their success. There was still one final phase left, the stage where every other species had failed. The phase designed to strip away their last hope. The true breaking point. Without warning, the final catastrophe began. The simulated Earth shook as powerful quakes tore through cities, splitting the ground apart. Rivers flooded, swallowing entire villages. Fires broke out in what remained of human settlements, consuming homes that had taken months to rebuild. Communication, which had been carefully maintained through radio signals and messenger networks, was severed completely. The last remaining supply routes were cut off. Those who had survived through cooperation were now isolated, trapped in pockets of destruction. But the worst was yet to come. As if nature itself had turned against them, the sky opened up, unleashing storms unlike anything seen before. The freezing winds howled through the ruins, and the darkness became even thicker, the sun completely erased from view. The Union observed carefully, waiting for humanity to break. Then came the final blow, the test's ultimate deception. The simulation introduced a threat that no other species had ever been able to resist. The humans believed they were the only survivors, but now the illusion shifted. Across the ruins, they saw figures emerging other survivors, or so they thought. These new arrivals were not real. They were Union agents, disguised as desperate, starving humans, begging for help. This was the moment when other species had always failed. Every civilization before them had faced this same trick, and in every case, the outcome was the same. The survivors, already pushed to the edge of desperation, had always responded with fear and selfishness. Some attacked, seeing the strangers as a threat to their limited resources. Others abandoned their morals, stealing from the weak to ensure their own survival. Alliances shattered. Trust was destroyed. The Union knew that the test always ended the same way, with betrayal. But once again, the humans did something unexpected. Instead of attacking, instead of turning on each other, they hesitated. They had been betrayed before, had faced dangers beyond comprehension, yet still they did not act with blind fear. Instead of assuming the worst, they asked questions. Instead of fighting, they tried to help. Even with their own resources running out, even with no promise of safety, they extended a hand. Some were cautious, of course. Some held onto their weapons, unsure of whether to trust. But they did not become monsters. They did not lose themselves to the darkness. They still chose to be human. The Union officials watched in silence. They had seen species with greater strength fail. They had seen civilizations more advanced than humanity crumble in this exact moment. Yet these humans had refused to surrender to the same fate. They had been given every reason to turn against each other, every reason to become just another failure, but they had resisted. Not because they were immune to fear, not because they were without flaws, but because something inside them refused to accept defeat. They were stubborn, reckless, and flawed beyond measure. But they were also something else. They were relentless. The final phase of the test had not gone as expected. The humans had reached the breaking point, but they had not broken. They had lost much, but they had not lost themselves. The Union had believed that no species could pass the test because survival at this level required a willingness to abandon morality. But humanity had proven that assumption wrong. They had survived, not by becoming selfish, but by holding on to each other. They had endured, not by destroying, but by rebuilding. For the first time in the history of the test, a species had faced every challenge, every disaster, every deception, and still remained standing. The simulation came to an end. The disaster faded, the black clouds dispersed, and the world was restored to what it once was. The humans, exhausted and battered, looked around in confusion. They did not know they had been tested. They did not realize they had just done the impossible. But the Union did. In the silence of their grand observation halls, the officials faced a truth that shook them to their core. The test had not revealed humanity's weakness. It had revealed something far more dangerous. It had revealed their strength. The world stood in eerie silence. The disaster had ended, the storms had faded, and the black clouds that had swallowed the sun were gone. Humanity had endured every trial, defied every expectation, and yet the test was not over. The Galactic Union had designed this ordeal to be impossible, a perfect mechanism to expose the weaknesses of any species. And now, for the first time in history, they had reached the final stage. The last test was never supposed to come. No species had ever survived long enough to face it. Yet here humanity stood, battered but unbroken. The Union's leaders watched in tense silence. Every other challenge had tested their endurance, their unity, their morality. But this test was different. This one was designed to test the very essence of what made them who they were. It was no longer about survival. It was about choice. Without warning, the simulation shifted. The ruins of Earth faded, replaced by a vision of restoration. The cities that had crumbled now stood tall once more. The lands that had been burned and drowned were whole again. The streets were alive with people who had once fallen in the disaster. Loved ones who had been lost in the trials now stood before the survivors, unharmed, smiling as if nothing had happened. It was paradise, a world free from suffering, from pain, from hardship. The air was warm, the sun bright, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was peace. But it was a lie. The humans did not know it yet, but none of this was real. It was the final illusion, the last deception. And the true test had just begun. A voice echoed in their minds, calm and powerful. It offered them a choice. They could stay in this world, free from all struggles. The suffering they had endured would be undone. The dead would return. The hardships they had faced would become nothing more than a distant memory. All they had to do was accept the gift before them. But there was another option. They could reject the illusion and return to reality, to the real world beyond the test. A world still broken, still uncertain. A world where the struggles they had faced were real, where the losses they had suffered could not be undone. The choice was simple: eternal peace or the return to an uncertain future. Every species before them had chosen the illusion. After all, why would anyone choose suffering when paradise was within reach? For a long moment, no one spoke. The survivors looked around, their minds torn between hope and doubt. The families they had lost, the friends who had died in their arms, here they were, alive again. It was everything they had fought for, everything they had wanted. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed with emotion. Some reached out, touching the hands of those they had mourned, feeling warmth where there had only been emptiness. It felt real. It felt right. And yet, deep inside, a single doubt began to grow. If this was truly a reward, why did it feel so easy? If they had truly won, why did it feel like a trick? The Union's observers watched closely, waiting for them to surrender to the illusion as every species before them had. But something strange was happening. The humans were hesitating. A young woman stepped forward, looking into the sky with narrowed eyes. Something about this world felt wrong. There was no sound of wind, no true scent in the air. The laughter of her loved ones felt rehearsed. She turned to one of them, asking a question that should have had a simple answer. "Where were you when the sky went dark?" The figure hesitated, just for a moment, but enough for her to notice. Another man looked around, seeing his friends smiling at him, but their eyes were empty. A mother reached for the child she had lost, but as her fingers touched his face, something in her heart told her the truth. This was not real. This was not right. And then, one by one, others began to see it too. The deception was failing. The illusion was perfect in appearance, but it lacked one thing: reality. The humans had faced loss, pain, and struggle. They had endured the worst the universe could throw at them. And in that suffering, they had found something stronger than any illusion: the will to move forward, no matter how hard the path. They had not survived by choosing comfort. They had survived by choosing to fight. And now, faced with a world free from pain, they did not embrace it. They questioned it. They rejected it. And in doing so, they shattered the final illusion. The paradise faded in an instant, dissolving into the endless void of the simulation. The survivors stood once more in the cold, darkened remains of the test chamber, their bodies weak, their minds exhausted, but their spirits unbroken. The Galactic Union's leaders stared in disbelief. The humans had done what no species had ever done. They had passed the final trial. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they refused to accept an easy lie over a hard truth. They had proven that they did not just survive hardships, they embraced them. They understood that life was not about avoiding struggle, but about overcoming it. The test had not broken them. It had revealed them. Humanity had not only passed, they had rewritten the very meaning of the trial. The Union's greatest minds, those who had designed this impossible test, now faced a question they had never imagined asking. What happens when a species does not seek an escape, but instead chooses to keep fighting? What happens when they refuse to surrender, even to paradise itself? The answer was clear. The humans had proven something the galaxy had never considered before. They were not just survivors. They were unstoppable. The message echoed across the stars, a simple but chilling declaration: the trial has ended. Humanity stands alone. The Galactic Union had tested thousands of species before. Every one of them had failed. Some crumbled under the pressure, others turned on each other, and many simply accepted their fate. But humanity had defied every expectation. They had survived the impossible, endured hardships that no species before them had withstood. The final trial, designed to strip them of hope and force them to surrender, had only revealed their true nature. They had chosen the hard path, rejecting illusion and embracing reality, even when it meant suffering. The Union had never prepared for this. There was no plan for what came next. The great chamber of the Union's council was silent. High-ranking officials from every major species sat in stunned disbelief. The test had been absolute, a system perfected over centuries, a method to determine which civilizations were fit to stand among the stars. none had ever passed. Until now. The humans had broken the pattern, rewritten the rules, shattered the limits the Union had believed to be unbreakable. And now, the leaders of the galaxy faced an unsettling truth. Humanity was not like the others. The test had been designed not only to measure strength, but to assess a species' ability to integrate, to submit to the larger galactic order. Those who failed were never allowed to join. They were quietly removed, erased before they could become a threat. But the humans were different. They had not only survived, they had proven they could stand without help. They had endured without aid, fought without allies, rebuilt without guidance. They had passed the test, but in doing so, they had proven something even more dangerous. They did not need the Union. And that terrified them. A deep unease spread through the Council. The Union had always existed as the ultimate authority, controlling who could rise and who would fall. But they had never faced a species that could look them in the eye and say, "We do not need you." The humans had proven their strength, but they had also revealed something more troubling. They had the will to stand alone. If they could survive the trial without assistance, what else were they capable of? What would happen if they turned that same resilience, that same unbreakable will, toward conquest? The Union had suppressed many dangerous civilizations before they could become threats. But humanity was different. They had not been stopped in time. ASA to Council debated in hushed voices. Across the void of space, Earth's leaders received the final transmission. The test was over. They had succeeded. But instead of welcome, instead of open arms, there was only silence. The invitation to join the Union never came. There was no offer of alliance, no recognition of their achievement. Instead, humanity received a single declaration: they were alone. The message was clear. The Union feared them. They would not allow humanity to join them. They would not risk what they could become. On Earth, the reaction was mixed. Some had hoped for acceptance, for unity among the stars. Others had suspected this outcome all along. Humanity had never relied on others before. Why should now be any different? Across the planet, leaders and scientists looked to the future with a new understanding. The Union had expected humanity to beg for a place among them. But they had underestimated one simple truth: humanity had never needed permission. If the Union would not welcome them, then humanity would carve its own path. They had always been survivors, pioneers, warriors when necessary. They had defied extinction before, and now, standing at the edge of the stars, they would do it again. Alone, if they had to. And the galaxy would soon learn that nothing was more dangerous than a species that refused to break.